Okay, this next part we're going to be talking about is financial literacy, and we're going to be talking about where does the money go. This is going to be that second part of your 0 to 60 workshops that I was talking about earlier. Like I said, this is part of that modules on there. This again also will count towards that job search for the week. Hopefully this is not where all your money's going. If you recognize that sound, that's a casino. Hopefully that's not where you're spending all your money. Otherwise we'll probably have to have a talk a little later afterwards, and that's probably not some good financial planning that you're going to win the lottery or something. So we're going to talk about why do we, some of the things we're going to talk about is why financial literacy. We're going to be talking about budgets, or like I like to call them as plans, because let's face it, budgets, you talk about the federal or state budgets, they're negative, and I try to keep things in more of a positive, upbeat things, so I'm going to call them plans probably as we're going through this. So we're going to be talking about what are those things we need to have in those plans. We're going to also be talking about some spending plans, financial options, and then we're going to also talk about the next steps. So why financial literacy? Well, everyone needs to have some form of financial literacy when it comes to their finances, and we want it to be simple or painless. If you think back to 2008, 2009, there was a huge demand for a lot of services, both on the state and federal levels. Also thinking that same period of time, there was a lot of people losing their homes because they were in what they call adjustable rate mortgages. One day they're paying maybe $600 a month for their mortgage, the next day they're paying $1,200. So they created a huge demand on all the programs. So one thing that Governor Doyle at the time instituted is if anybody was coming through the Job Center or any other state-funded program, they had to have some kind of financial literacy training. And like I said, we wanted it to be simple and painless. We didn't want to have a 16-hour training on financial literacy because I could definitely do that. I got a curriculum set up for dealing with high school kids and talk about financial literacy. But you're adults. You've been out there in the labor market. I don't think you need to know exactly how the savings works and interest is generated, all that stuff. What you need to do is just a good refresher in what you're going to need to move forward. So as we're developing our plan or our budget, some things we need to know is resources. One of those resources is the income. Wages from a job, whether it's full-time, part-time, significant others, or spouse, those wages, those are all going to go in that plan. Other resources that may be included are child support if you're the one that's receiving child support. Unemployment, unemployment's a resource. Yes, it's only going to last for a period of time, but it is actually a resource that we can include in our budget. And then some other resources you may also include are Social Security, veterans benefits, and pensions if those apply to you. Some other resources we may want to also consider is medical assistance. If you're receiving assistance for medical insurance, such as Badger Care, those are resources that you would include in there. Maybe you're not paying for that premium, but you are receiving that in kind. Other resources to include are food assistance, energy assistance, daycare, and housing assistance. These are all resources that are available to you. You just have to apply for them. The main thing with Badger Care, it is for families, but there are some exceptions to the rule. Same as with food share, there's some exceptions to the rule. A lot of times people don't apply for it. They think, okay, I'm single, I'm not eligible for it. And then they find out after they go down to social services, they find, I can get $60 a month for food share or $200 a month for food share, depending on their circumstance. Maybe I can get the very basic Badger Care that's going to maybe only cover major medical, but at least you got something versus you have nothing. So I always tell people, to really go through the process and apply. Other things we're going to include in our budget or our plan are fixed expenses. Those are things like housing, whether it's renting or we own our house. Those are those fixed expenses. Utilities. Living in the state of Wisconsin, you need to have utilities. You can't live in a house without electric or heat of some kind. Otherwise, you just got, especially when it gets to be like 35 below, you have nothing more than a walk-in cooler. Food. We need to have food to survive. Transportation. You got to have reliable transportation to get to work and to look for work. So we have to have some mode of transportation. And then medical. A lot of times we forget about this, but if you have maintenance prescriptions you have to take, such as, like, let's say you're diabetic, you got to have that. That's all like a life. It's like a life string, kind of like going with that food. That's probably going to be a higher priority than, I need to go out and buy an Xbox game. So, you're going to have that as a fixed expense. Some variable expenses. These are things that fluctuate. They're not necessarily going to be there every month, but you need to put them into your plan. Things like clothing. You're probably not going to run out and buy a brand new pair of shoes and jeans and shirts every month, especially if you're only on a limited budget. But, look at what you spend over the course of a year and divide that by 12. That's what you're going to want to put into your budget plan. So that way, at least you're not writing a check out for a brand new pair of shoes and you don't have the money to cover for it. Personal care. This can include everything from haircuts, getting your nails done. Those are all things you want to include in your budget. Education. This can not only apply for your own personal education, but your children's education. Maybe there's some expenses they have to cover. A lot of times with like the grade schools and the high schools, if they're all for sports, they have some fees that are charged. I know, like in my school district where my child goes to, he's out for sports. It's $30 a semester for being in sports. That's to help offset some of the use of the maintenance of the equipment. I don't know if I necessarily agree with it, but, it's the way it is. They're trying not to pass the full buck onto the taxpayers. So, it's something that we also have to put into our budget. Recreation and entertainment. Those are things that are going to fluctuate. Maybe as part of your stress management plan, you're going to go out to eat with your significant other once a month. That's you say, hey, no matter what, even though money's tight, we're going to try to keep our household somewhat sane. We're going to try to go out one night a month, and we're going to go out to dinner. Okay, well, what are you going to typically spend when you go out there one night of dinner? Okay, you may have a few drinks, a meal, whatnot. You could very easily have $40 or $50 probably or more in that one time you go out. Now, granted, you could probably make that same meal in your home for probably a third of that cost, but it's not the same atmosphere. You got kids running around and all this other stuff going on. That would typically go underneath the recreation or entertainment category on your budget. Contributions and gifts. Obviously, if money's tight, you may not be giving as much to the contributions and gifts, but don't forget about those gifts that, with the holiday season coming up. A lot of times we don't think about that, but what do you typically spend on those gifts? Divide it out by 12 so it softens the blow a little bit, so you ain't all of a sudden using the credit card to pay for all those expenses. And then childcare. If you have young children at home, that can fluctuate. But there's also some other options you can do there. Maybe a family member, a friend that can help you out. So you got those short trips where you need to run to the grocery store, run to the doctor. Utilize those resources. And a lot of times, if you've got a grandparent or something that can help out, they probably welcome it. I know my son's grandparents, they always are welcoming. It's like, oh, you need somebody to watch your child for a couple hours. To them, it's like, they get to spend time with their grandchildren. So, and it's all helping you out in the end too. And then pets. A lot of times we forget about pets, but they do create a cost. If you have a dog, you got the dog food, the shots, the license. If you have a cat, you got cat litter. All those things that you maybe not give much thought to, but the reality is you may be spending $20, $30 a month on that you weren't even factoring into your budget when you're working, but now all of a sudden now you're not working. It's like, okay, where do I come up with that $30? That's $1 a day. Where do I come up with that cost? So you got to include that in your budget. Some other things to include is occasional or seasonal expenses. Property tax. If you own property, typically right around Christmas time, you get a property tax bill. Most people, if they got a home mortgage, most of the lenders these days are setting up escrow accounts, so it's usually not something to worry about because your escrow account will take care of it. But if you're in a situation where you don't have that, you got to plan for that. The other one is income taxes. Typically most people that are laid off from their job, they usually don't have to pay in. They usually got a refund coming. And I always tell people, as soon as you got all the paperwork together to get that refund, get it in the mail. Don't wait until April 15th to send it out. because all you're doing is giving the state of Wisconsin, the federal government, an interest-free loan. So, if you got a refund, by all means, get that thing in the mail as soon as possible. Or if you file online, do it that way. Now, on the other hand, if you owe, I'd probably wait until probably the beginning of April to file, just because, let's face it, the government spends money like it's water. I mean, let's say you owed $1,000 to the federal government. How is that $1,000 going to be spent? This could be spent so fast that you snap your finger, the money's gone. So I'm not saying don't pay your taxes, but don't be overzealous to get it paid. If you're in a situation where you got to pay in until you have to absolutely pay it in. School expenses. I kind of touched on this already, but there's those occasional expenses. At the beginning of school year, a lot of times, especially if you have grade school or high school children. They have certain color notebooks they got to have, certain color folders. They got certain things like the calculators and things like they have to have for school. So those are things you need to plan. So you need to set some money aside in your budget for that. Insurance premiums. A lot of times when it comes to auto insurance, a lot of times usually you're paying quarterly or semi-annually or even annually. I know too many people that are unemployed that can afford to write out a semi-annual auto insurance thing and not have it affect their budget unless they've already planned for it. Because typically that will throw a huge snafu into your budget if all of a sudden you're writing a $200 check out because you really are taking money away from something else that needed to get paid. And then we already talked about the holidays. Plan for them. Try not to use the credit card to pay for the holidays. It's the thought that counts. A lot of times we forget about that, but really that is truly the situation. You don't have to spend $100 to have the thought count. It can be something small and this being together. So as you move forward into the holiday season, keep that in mind. How many people pay for their gas at the fuel pump? Pretty much everybody. For those that don't pay for the gas at the fuel pump, what are some things you'd see at any kind of a convenience store that you're going to pay for your gas? Everything? Okay. Yeah, you're going to probably see coffee, you're going to see soda, candy bars, donuts, beer, lottery tickets, cigarettes. All those things you're going to see as you walk into those convenience stores. You ever notice how they have them kind of situated? You kind of got to go through this maze. That's really marketing. They're setting it up in such a way because they know that we're impulse buyers. It's been studied time and time again. Americans are impulse buyers. I've been fortunate enough to be overseas 3 times. And all 3 of those times, they find out you're an American. It's like, ooh, let's bring out the sale items. I always laughed about it when I was in Baghdad. The little market guys, they would come out with their little carts, and they had all this gold jewelry and stuff. I call it the bling bling cart. They'd roll that sucker out because they wanted us American soldiers to buy that stuff because that's they wanted the American money because that actually was worth more than their own currency. And they know Americans are impulse buyers. So they're thinking, okay, well, these guys are away from home and they see this and they think it's a good deal. They're going to buy it for the mom or dad or, somebody back home. They're going to buy it, send home, and everybody's happy because Americans are impulse buyers. Sometimes we might just, I remember some of those patrols. Sometimes we just bought stuff just to get some intel from the guys. We say, okay, well, I'll buy this from you, but I want to know what's going on. Sometimes we kind of worked it to our advantage too, but the impulse thing has been, even foreign countries know that we're impulse buyers as Americans. How many people have cell phones? Probably everybody this time. One thing I always tell people is, and I challenge you to look at your cell phone bill over the next 2 months. Look at what your plan is. Look at how much texting you're doing. That's a prime one. A lot of times people have unlimited texting on their cell phones and maybe don't use texting. Or maybe they have Nationwide on their phone plan and they're not using Nationwide. Maybe they're finding they're making all local calls. Those are little things you can make adjustments on. I was able to make an adjustment on my family's phone plan. We cut back to actual set a number of texts because we found we were using that many texts and we had Nationwide on our phone. We weren't traveling. It might sound like a small amount, but we saved like $750 a month. Well, $750 a month over the course of a year, it almost paid for 1 month's cell phone. So that was one reason why we did away with that. So those are little things that I always say. I challenge you to look as you're moving forward. This next slide I got up here, it talks about some suggested budget amounts that you should have. For some of us, we've never had to do a budget. We've had a paycheck coming in, and you didn't have to worry about it. Money's come in, bills are getting paid, the rest of the money's going in savings, right? Well, now as things have changed in our lives, we need to really take a look at what do we need to set aside. Now, these suggested amounts that I'm provided on this slide here, they don't necessarily apply really when you're on unemployment. Because obviously, if you try to live on 25%, housing, for example, they're saying 25% of your available income each month should be earmarked for housing. Well, 25% of your unemployment is not going to get you much of a household coverage. So unless your house is paid for. But this is kind of a guideline just to, once you do get into the job, what is appropriate to have set aside for your budget. So you kind of know what should I be setting aside. Or maybe this is the time I could tighten my belt. Maybe I know I'm overspending on certain times, and now it's time to adjust. In your folders, I provided lots of different plans. There's weekly, monthly, and pay period budget plans. Feel free to use any one of them. Like I said earlier, these folders, they're yours. Anything that's in there, feel free to make it your own. Also included a book. It's called Family Finances, Getting By on Less handout. Encourage you to read it. It's kind of dry material, but it does have a lot of good pointers. Talks about how to, maybe explaining this if you have teenagers, how to deal with those finances. Also, another book that I handed you was a Surviving a Layoff book that I put in your folder for you. So as we went through and we developed our budget or our plan, we determined that our budget's in the negative or in the red. So we need to increase, some things we need to do is try to get that budget back into the black. One of the things we could do is increase income. But we have to be creative and realistic. We've got to work through the numbers, to figure out if that's going to help solve our spending plan. Maybe charging for things we already do for free. Maybe you're that nice neighbor that has a snowblower, and every winter you go out and you snowblow everybody's sidewalk. Well, as you're going through this transition, maybe you need to talk to those neighbors and say, hey, I'm on some tough times. Would you mind helping me out? Maybe provide me a little money for gas and my time for doing that. I have no problem doing that yet, but things are tough. Working a part-time job. I caution you to watch out for unemployment issues that may arise, because there has been some changes on unemployment rules. If you work 32 hours in any given week, you're not eligible for unemployment. It doesn't matter if it's 10 hours at this job and 22 hours at that job. As soon as you hit 32 hours, you're not eligible for unemployment during that week. It's not saying you're disallowed from unemployment. You just won't get an unemployment check during that week. So just kind of keep that in mind. I've had people that have said, hey, I work 32 hours at this job, and it's way less than what I was making at my previous job. Understandable, but the rules are, as such. So, another option we could do is decrease expenses. Use your plan to decrease your expenses. Redo your numbers. Maybe there's things you're overpaying on. Maybe there's things that you're over budgeting. You're padding your numbers a little bit too much. The key in this situation is stop creating debt. Now is not the time to run and buy a brand new car. Even though you may have the money, you need maybe worry about, maybe I need to keep what I've got going, figure out what other bills I need to pay off. Don't go out and create a huge debt while you're unemployed. Stop using credit cards, but if you do have one, develop a plan for its use and don't carry it with you because the temptation can be there. The reason why I tell people is maybe having a credit card is not a bad thing to have is because as we move, let's say you have a family event that happens and it's out of town. You have to go out of town to get a hotel room. Well, yes, most banks have debit cards. But last thing you want to do is throw a hotel room on a debit card, because what happens is you've probably seen that some of the hotels, they say that they could put a hold anywhere from 3 to 5 business days on your debit card for twice the amount that room was. Well, if that room was $150, that means they're going to tie up your debit card by another $150. Well, if you're already out of town and you're already on tight money, last thing you want to do is have $150 you can't use for the next week because they're going to have a hold against your debit card. So those might be situations where that credit card might be very appropriate to have. But then again, like I said, try to make sure you pay the minimum payment and try not to let the balance build up. And then determine each month how much you have to put towards a debt repayment plan. Try to prioritize your bills. Organize it by vendor, interest, balance, and what payments need to be met. There's certain payments and vendors you have to make sure you get paid every month. Credit cards is a prime example. You don't get them their minimum payment, they're going to report to the credit bureau, which is ultimately to bring your credit score down. A lot of employers, they're looking at credit scores when it comes to employing you nowadays. You know, I don't know if some people say I don't know if it's legal or not. Well, it's just reality. You know, there a lot. You know, especially get into some of the jobs they're dealing with money. They're doing bonding now. You know, where if I hired you on and you were working in my bank, I have to have you bond on you to work in my bank. Well, the more of a credit risk you are, the more that bond's going to cost me. Well, it might mean the difference between me hiring you or hiring somebody who has a lower credit risk. Even though you may have more skills and you may be better qualified for the job, it ultimately comes down to that bottom line. You know, if it's going to cost me an extra $3,000 a year to have you on my payroll, I might be willing to take the chance on the person with the less skills because I can train them on what, you know, the cost is going to be. Consolidating debt. You know, consolidation loans are good for people who already pay their bills or want efficient way to repay their bills. This may not work good in your situation right now. However, once you get back into the labor market, you know, this might be an option. You know, it's where they take all your bills, they pay them all off, and you're just making one payment. You know, typically, it's what they call a power payment. So kind of keep that in mind as you're moving forward. Another option is borrowing from family or friends. I want to stress, be careful when you're dealing with this option, because why do you think I would want to say be careful when dealing with borrowing money from family or friends? Yeah, it could create some hardships if you don't pay back your family member or friends. You know, I always said, if you got a friend that you really don't want to see much, just loan them a couple $1,000. You'll never see them because they're probably not going to be able to pay for it. And then the other thing is caution, avoid turning unsecured debt into secured debt. Why would you think I mentioned caution on that?
Because you can go bankrupt on the unsecured debt.
Right.
Whereas a lot of people were doing that, they were taking out home equity loans to pay off their credit cards. Mm-hmm. And then when the economy went, they were upside down on their mortgage because of that credit card.
Right. I always tell people, you know, there's certain things that are secured. Secured things are anything that has a deed or title to it. Anything that doesn't have a deed or title to it, it's unsecured. So medical bills, credit card bills, all those things are unsecured debt. You know, like the gal mentioned here, you know, you could do a bankruptcy on unsecured debt and still be able to live in your home. You know, obviously I'm not a lawyer, and I would tell you that if you were that upside down in that situation, talk to a lawyer. But last thing you want to do is take your home equity, tie that into that, you know, that maybe $250,000 worth of unsecured debt you're trying to deal with. You know, sometimes for some people that is the only option out. You know, especially, you know, I've known people that have had, you know, major health issues that arose, and they racked up $200,000 in medical bills. Well, even at $1,000 a month, they would never pay it off in their lifetime. So the only way to get out from underneath that rock was to claim bankruptcy. You know, it's not something you want to do, but, you know, sometimes we have to do that to move forward. Some other things you may want to do as you're moving forward is negotiate with your creditor. You know, come from a position of strength. Be creative and only threaten what is real. Bank loans and car loans can be rewritten and extended. You know, I always hear it all the time. You know, I've got an older car. The bank's not going to give me an extension of my loan because when they loaned me the money, they told me the max they can loan it to me is for 24 months. Well, that may be indeed the case when they loaned you the money, but the last thing they want you to do is show up on some Thursday afternoon with the keys and title to that car and say, hey, guess what? I don't want to make payments on it anymore because I can't afford it. They'd rather have you come in and talk to them, work with you, and try to figure out a plan. They may have to extend it out another year. The downside is you're paying interest on it for another year, but at least you're keeping your car. Or if you're in a situation where you truly need to get rid of the car, you may need to talk to that banker and say, hey, can I sell it? As soon as I get an eligible buyer for it, can I go ahead and sell it? And, you know, you sign the paperwork over, and whatever is not covered, we'll just put a signature on it. And sometimes the banker will work with you on that. Credit counseling. There's so many resources out there. You know, I do this workshop across the 9 counties, so I could have probably 5 slides on just, those resources. But every county has a UW extension office. So I highly encourage you, I don't know the makeup of this group, looks like it's mainly Marathon and Lincoln County, but UW extension office, they're going to have a lot of those resources. If I mentioned Marathon or Lincoln County, if you live in those counties, another resource is United Ways 211. everything from credit counselors to, where can I find a county park that has, these kind of resources, or maybe I need somebody to watch my dog for the weekend because I have to travel out of town. The United Way 211, that's a service that's there. Use it. They can help you with a lot of that stuff. We already talked a little bit about bankruptcy. There's two major types. There's Chapter 7 and Chapter 13. There are consequences and long-term effects on credit. So the best advice I can give you is talk to a lawyer on that. There's going to be some counseling you're going to have to go through both prior to the bankruptcy and obviously after the bankruptcy. So it's not going to be just like where you pay the lawyer a certain amount of money and it's done. There's going to be some steps you're going to have to do, sort of like, going through these workshops here at the job center. There's certain steps you have to go through to get through that hoops. Cash advance loans, they're quick and simple loans, but they come with high interest rates. Anybody ever had to deal with like a check advance or any place like that? Well, for those that haven't, I'll give you just a quick class on that. A lot of times what they do is they dangle the carrot out there to get you to come in the door. Like I said, they'll offer you interest rates that are very lucrative. That, it sounds like, okay, this is very comparable to what I get at any bank. Let's say, for example, I went to the car garage and I needed to put 2 new tires on my car. And they wanted $350 for those tires mounted in balance. Well, I didn't have $350 in cash. Well, I see a check advance place right across the street. I go talk to them. They say, okay, yeah, we'll give you $350 today to pay for those tires. You just write us a check for $375 and post it at 90 days into the future. We'll cash it. You think, okay, that's not bad. $25 for 90 days. I think it's a good deal. Day 89 comes along and you realize, wow, I don't have $375 to cover that bill. I'm going to go back and talk to those folks. They're like, oh, that was just, they go on to explain that there was an introductory offer to get you the money. Now, if we can we can extend that loan by another 90 days for that $375 you owe us, but now it's going to cost you $475. You see how quick that interest jumps up? It keeps going up. I've seen APRs in the state of Wisconsin as high as 508% interest, and it's legal because everything in that industry has been deregulated. They prey on people that don't have no credit. They prey on people that are unemployed. You see many people that are driving around that are maybe on public assistance. They probably have 2 or 3 title loans against their vehicle. The reality is that car will be crushed and remade into a new car before they ever get that first car paid for. So, be very careful when you're dealing with those type of loan places. Credit repair agencies. There's a lot of different infomercials you've probably heard on TV late at night. The truth is they can't deliver. Only a conscious effort is going to help you get your credit back in line. It's going to take time. There's no magic wand out there that's going to make everything disappear. A lot of times you see those ads on TV and they say, oh, for $89.95 a month, we'll get your credit back in line. Well, we're providing you a folder with a lot of that same information, and we're not charging $89.95 a month. A lot of this stuff you have to do it on your own, but, take the information and use it to your advantage. In your folders, I provided an example of a creditor letter. Writing that letter to the creditor will help you with budgeting problems. Make sure in that letter you state the purpose and you propose a plan for paying that debt. Okay, I lost my job. Okay, that's maybe your reason why you lost, that purpose for writing the letter. What's my plan? Okay, they want me to pay $100 a month, but the reality is I can afford only $50. So you put, okay, I can afford $50 a month. Every month on the 15th, I'm going to have a check to you for $50. Now, I always get people that come to me and they say, well, what if they come back and they say they won't agree to it, and they give me a counter offer of $70? Okay, did you really lose anything? No, because they met you halfway, right, or part way, right? Yeah, it cost you some time and a postage stamp, but the reality is you gained a little bit of ground. And, you could probably work that extra $20 into your budget if you may have to cut somewhere else. How many people are aware you can get a free annual credit report from every year? Just a couple, huh? Well, there's one website out there. It's called annualcreditreport.com. They'll get you reports from the Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. Those are the 3 major credit reporting bureaus in the United States. Why do you think that it would be very important to check your annual credit report as you're going through this? Right, they're using your information. What are some things that you had to provide when you started your unemployment claim? Now, I'm not saying unemployment's been compromised, but what are some of those things you had to provide? Social Security number, your name, name, date of birth. If I'm a bad guy, kind of going over to some of my military training, if I have all the information, I could steal your identity. And probably just, I'm just going to throw a guess out. You're probably everybody in this room. I could probably get a $2,500 or more credit card easily. You know, how long do you think it's going to take me to max out a $2,500 credit card? Probably a click of one mouse. I'm going to go buy things on the black market. I'm going to buy electronics, things I could sell on the black market. I don't care what I get for it once I go to sell it. It didn't cost me nothing anyways, right? Somebody else's money. So keep that in mind. There's been a lot of identity theft in the news, and the only way you're going to get that off your credit report is you got to be, you know, aware of what's going on. The longer it sits out there, the harder it gets to get it off there. I've had people come in and say, hey, I had this bill that supposedly I made out in California. Never been to California, and they say, oh, $10,000 out there. And it's been on it for 15 years. Okay, well, you're going to have a lot of legwork to do to show how the $15,000 didn't get spent by you. So, you know, the way you can get that off your credit report is you got to be proactive. So, I do have a paper form in your folders. If you don't feel comfortable doing it online, you can actually mail it, and there's actual mailing address on there. So we're going to kind of switch gears. We talked a little bit about budgets and whatnot. Now we're going to talk about those resources for those who are maybe considering school. Some of those resources are federal financial aid. This is where you're going to get the Pell Grants, higher education grants, student loans, both subsidized and unsubsidized. The only way you can get those is you have to apply. There's nobody at the school that's going to come walking up there and say, hey, I got, you know, $1,000 I want to give you to go to school. I mean, they may tell you that you may be eligible for grants, but they're going to refer you to this website. It's, you know, it's the federal financial aid website. It's fafsa.ed.gov. Don't go to the one that says .com, because that one's going to probably charge you some money. It's a free application. The federal government does not charge for applications to get grants. Some other resources is scholarships. A lot of times when we think of scholarships, we think of high school kids, but the reality is there's a lot of scholarships out there for the adult learners. NTC is an example. They have a foundation grant, so they got businesses that donate money all the time. There's been semesters where there's been people that there's grants, or scholarships that have never even been awarded because people never applied for them. Could have been a grant or a scholarship that was worth as little as $500 all the way up to $2,000. If somebody would have took the time, filled out the little short narrative, they could have had that scholarship. But nobody took the time, so the money just sits there. So it's a resource, especially if maybe you're on the waiting list for the dislocated worker program. It's a way to get started. You know, maybe it's not going to pay for your full education, but it may cover a couple classes, so I definitely encourage you to look at that. Another program that's offered here in the Job Center is called the WIA Adult Program. Very similar to the Dislocated Worker Program. However, they do have some different funding limits and some different eligibility limits, so I would encourage you to check it out, especially if you're on that waiting list. Because as time goes on, you more likely will become eligible as time goes on, because one of the things they look at is income. And they don't count unemployment as income, so when it comes to that program. Do we have any vets in the room or spouses of vets? Lots of vets funding out there. You know, so there's a lot of resources out there. We do have some job service staff here at the Job Center. Highly encourage you to talk to those folks. If you are in that situation, you know, they can definitely help. So we're going to wrap up things here with this second workshop here. Utilize all the tools we talked about dealing with your financial stress. Develop a usable budget or plan. Check your credit report. Rate what's important. Understand there's requirements and consequences to everything we're doing. And then if you are considering training, I encourage you to apply for financial aid early. Don't wait until 2 weeks before the start of school, because that's just going to delay your financial aid award letter, all that stuff. So if you're looking at school for the spring, spring semester starts in mid-January, now is the time to apply. I think the open enrollment actually starts in the next couple of weeks for actually spring classes, so the more proactive you are, the better off you'll be. So that concludes both workshops. I'll be available for any questions, and I thank you for your attendance.